Bienvenidos, Ushamdid, and welcome UMGC learners for CMIT-455 Section 6380, which is the CCNP ENCOR version 8 curriculum from the Cisco Networking Academy for the spring 2021 semester. In this activity, we're going to be taking a further look at configuring VTP. And so this is a one-off supplement of the video that I produced on Packet Tracer Activity 5.2.1, where we talked about the VLAN trunking protocol as well as the dynamic trunking protocol. This video, we're going to be leveraging Cisco Modeling Labs, formerly known as Viral, in order to perform VTP version 3 configuration and validation tasks. And this is also going to allow us to go a little bit beyond where Packet Tracer is able to take us. If you remember from the previous video when we were in Packet Tracer and we were on switches here, if I tried to change the VTP version to version 3, you'll notice that only version 1 and version 2 are supported in Packet Tracer. Now, for the CCNA level, this is great. However, for CCNP and beyond, like the CCIE, we really need to talk about VTP version 3. Because VTP version 3 has a number of significant enhancements that VTP versions 1 and 2 do not support. So just a couple of those right out of the gate. Keep in mind that with VTP version 3, we can use private VLANs and have that information synchronized that you can't do in version 1 and version 2. So in version 1 and version 2, the switch would have to be in transparent mode. And so for private VLANs and the extended range VLANs, if you wanted to use PVLANs and extended range VLANs, you had to be in transparent mode. With VTP version 3, you do not. A significant security enhancement to VTP version 3 is the fact that we can now hide or encrypt, if you will, the password that we set on the VTP domain. This is something with VTP version 1 and 2 you could not do. And the final enhancement, and probably the most important, is the primary server role. Because there's a scenario that exists, and I've seen this happen. I had a coworker where we had a 3550, let's say switch number 3. It was an older switch, a 3550, and it failed. And so he did the diligent thing. He went into the closet where we have, into the storage area, we had a bunch of extra leftover switches that were not being used anymore. He grabbed one of those switches and he plugged it into the network and then connected it to the VTP server. Now, the switch was also a VTP server, I'll just put VTPS, that had a higher revision number than the current VTP server. And he overwrote the VLAN database across 5 different switches by mistake and took down a decently sized network for which there was little to no documentation as to which VLANs should have been configured on which ports. He was there, this happened right around 5 o'clock, and he was there until 1 a.m. in the morning trying to sort this out. And so if you introduce a switch, and this is why that dynamic desirable, the default dynamic trunking protocol setting on older legacy Cisco switches was such a huge threat when you went to introduce those switches into the environment. Again, what you should do is change the VTP domain name and then change it back to what it's supposed to be. That would zero out your revision number. Or you can say VTP mode transparent and then change it back to a client or a server. And that will also zero out the revision number. And you want to make sure that you do that before you introduce a switch into the environment. Because remember, if you put a switch on your network and the VTP domain information matches what's already set up, and it has and it had the same VTP password as well, by the way, because again, it was a previously used switch, and that will overwrite your VLAN database. And so we're going to go a little bit beyond here. So let's take a look at the environment that we're going to be working in here with Cisco Modeling Labs. Now, I've already taken it upon myself to configure all of these links are hard-coded as trunk links. We're on switch number 1 here, and let's go ahead and go into privilege exec from user exec, and let's say show interface trunk. And you should be able to look at this, and we're not going to use multiple VLANs right now. We will shortly, but again, these are brand new switches. The only configuration is the host name has been set up, and I've set the trunk ports up. And so you can see we've got 2 trunk ports here, and for those trunk port configurations, show run int gig01. Whoops, int gig01. You'll notice that all of the trunk ports throughout this environment are set up identically. Switch port trunk encap.1q, again, because this is not a 2960, and we saw previously where it forces you to do this before you hard code it as a trunk because it's an auto negotiate mode. And I said switch port mode trunk and then switch port no negotiate. So hard coded as a trunk, so it shows up as on in terms of the mode, and switch port no negotiate to disable DTP. And that is a best practice configuration right there at its simplest for a trunk link with Cisco switches. So VTP version 1 and VTP version 2. You couldn't hide the password. You couldn't use the extended range VLANs. You couldn't synchronize private VLANs. So VTP version 3 allows us to do all of that. So let's go ahead and configure switch 1. And again, I'm doing this configuration according to the diagram on page 95 in the course text, and it's figure 5.1. It's a sample topology for VTP, but let's get this configured. So the first thing I'm going to do is say do show VTP status. Let's see what we currently have set up. As you can see, by default, it will be in server mode. And because it's version 1, you can see it supports versions 1 to 3, but it's running version 1. And we don't want that. We want version 3. That's also why we see that the maximum number of VLANs supported locally is 1005. So to change, excuse me, to change this to VTP version 3, we'll first set the domain. You'll notice the domain is null, right? It's not nothing, it's null. And we'll see that message here when we do the configuration. And we'll just say that this is CCNP. And you can see the VTP domain has changed from null to CCNP. And then I'm going to say VTP version 3. Now this is going to change the version to version 3. Now you can see we had an old version there, and it showed version 2 for the configuration. But now everything is going to be version 3. So do show VTP status is now going to show me that I'm running version 3. The domain is CCNP. The mode is server. Now, is it the primary server? That's another difference here. And this is the game changer in my mind in terms of protecting yourself from introducing or mistakenly having either a bad actor or a junior network engineer or even a senior network engineer who just forgets and plugs in a switch into your switching and domain that has a higher VTP revision number configured on that switch and possibly wiping out your VLAN setting. And this is where VTP version 1 and version 2 got a really, really bad reputation early on. Because again, I've seen this happen and it is not something that you want to have happen. And so this was a huge problem. So this is a VTP version 3 server, but it's not the primary server. But we'll come back to that because now in order to make any changes, I have to issue the privilege exec command VTP primary. And so in other words, what I'm trying to say is we can configure, if I was to configure all of these switches as servers, only one of them at a time could be the primary on which I can make changes. All of the others would be considered secondary servers. So you have your primary servers and your secondary servers. Now the roles remain the same. You still have the server role and the client role and the transparent role and the off role. And so in terms of all of the roles that we've seen, those 4 roles don't change. They're still the roles that we have here in VTP version 3. The difference is that in order to make a change on a server, we have to change into what is known as VTP primary mode. And that allows me to go out and check to make sure that nobody else is currently set up as VTP primary. Again, because you can only have one VTP primary per VTP version 3 domain at a time. And we'll take a look at that here as we transition along. And so you can see here, we also have some new output down here because VTP version 3 is not just for VLANs anymore. VTP version 3 can be used for multiple spanning tree, and the synchronization of the multiple spanning tree region configuration. So again, another benefit of VTP version 3. So let's wrap our configuration up right here. We've got the everything is set. Now we're going to do the password, right? So VTP password, and I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to say ABC123. And I'm going to hit enter, and you can see it set the password to ABC123. So now I'm going to say do show VTP password. And you're probably wondering, wait a second. You said that we could encrypt the password so it couldn't be seen like that. And the answer is you can. It's just that when you set the password, you need to set it as hidden. So I say VTP password ABC123 hidden. And now when we say do show VTP password, we get that, which is definitely a little more difficult to read than the plain text password, right? So if we were going to provide the password in encrypted form, we would have said secret and then provided the encrypted form, which is that string right there. So now the password is hidden, the domain name is set. We're in VTP version 3. Let's configure some VLANs. And we're going to keep it simple here. I'm going to say VLAN 10, and there we go, right? So VTP VLAN configuration not allowed when the device is not the primary server for the VLAN database. And so here's where I need to get out of global config mode, back to privilege exec mode, and say VTP primary. Now, here's another benefit. It forces me to enter the VTP password. So if I don't know what the VTP password is, because if someone was shoulder surfing, which means looking over your shoulder possibly, it would be very easy to say, oh, it's ABC123, piece of cake. They could then elevate themselves and the switch to a VTP primary role. However, if they see this, then it's going to be a little bit more difficult. And again, to reiterate, that's really what the password use is with VTP. It is, again, it's not to stop the wiliest of hackers. It's to simply kind of prevent the shoulder surfers, just like the Type 7 passwords. It's to prevent the shoulder surfers from looking over your shoulder and seeing, oh, it's ABC123, or it's, I love Boba Fett, or whatever the password may be, right? They're going to see this encrypted string here, and it's going to make it more difficult. And so when I say VTP primary, I'm going to enter in ABC123. And what's going to happen now is there's going to be a check to see, and I'm sorry, I thought I hit enter there. There should be a check to see if any of the other switches in the VTP version 3 domain, and you can see it took a few seconds, right? And then we've got this notification that goes out, a warning, a syslog warning message, switch VLAN VTP primary server change, and there's my MAC address, me being switch 1, has become the primary server. And at this point, if there was a secondary server who tried to elevate its privileges via the VTP primary privilege exec command, it would see that there is a conflict. And you can see here, no conflicting devices found. Do you want to continue? And so I've changed to the primary role. So now I should be able to go into global config and say VLAN 10, and we'll name it red. And then I'm going to say VLAN 20. And we'll name it blue. And then I'm going to say VLAN 30. And I'll name it, what did we say, yellow. All right, so let's type end. Let me type right mem to save my configuration here. And you can see what has happened here, right? The VTP mode changed from server to client, and we've got some log messages that are coming up here. And I'll say show VLAN brief. And you can see that we now have those VLANs configured. And gig 02 and 03 are not being used because the trunk links are gig 0, and I'm trying to remember what I had set those up as. I think it's coming off of switch 1. Give me a second here. I actually drew a little diagram. Coming off of switch 1, it should have been, yeah, gig 00 and gig 01. And so that's why we don't see those. Those are our trunk links. Remember, show interface trunk. And so now VTP version 3 is configured. And so for me to now make my way through the rest of the environment, and we're going to set up 2 as a client and 3 is transparent mode. So let's get on to switch 2. And it's not that much more difficult from an operational perspective. The addition is that VTP primary command for me to elevate a VTP server to be the primary server. All right, so let's get into global config. And then let's say VTP, and actually I can say do show VTP status. And you can see here that this was a server version 1, so default configuration. So VTP domain is CCNP, VTP version is 3. And there we go. And then VTP mode for for switch 2 is going to be client. Now, let's say do show VLAN brief. Do we see those VLANs yet? We don't. We don't see the red and the blue and the green and the yellow. We don't see those yet. And the reason is because we haven't set the VTP password. Do show VTP password. You can see the VTP password's not configured. So we would say VTP password ABC123 and hidden. And there we go. So now if I say do show VTP password, I see that. Someone shoulder surfing's not going to be able to remember that, right? ABC123, they'd pretty quickly be able to figure out, be able to remember that and then maybe introduce a switch. So do show VLAN brief. Now that we've added the password, there it is. And that's really the crux of the difference between version 1 and 2 and version 3. We can encrypt the password. We've got that extended range VLAN. And so let's touch on that extended range VLAN. If I come over here and I go back over to switch number 1, what if I said, your boss says, hey, I want to make a cool VLAN for the prod network and we want it to be 3333. And so you get on here and you say, all right, well, I'm going to say VLAN 3333. Now, if I hit enter, what's going to happen right now? Is it going to put me into the VLAN config subconfiguration mode where I can then name the VLAN? Or am I going to see a message of an error message of some kind? Yeah, there it is, right? VTP VLAN configuration not allowed when device is in client mode. So it looks like when we exited out, it even put me into client mode. So let's go ahead and say do show VTP status. And this may be a bug of sorts. And that's interesting because you'll notice that it has me listed as the primary server. So when we came out of that configuration mode, the VLAN configuration mode, after issuing VTP primary, it looks like it, when you get this error message here, sorry, not that one there. Let's go back here and go up 2. So it looks like it thinks that you're sort of in a client mode, even though it shows the VT operating mode as primary server. So let's go ahead and say, let's exit out here and say VTP primary. And system can become primary server for a VLAN feature only when configured as a server. So it looks like the iOS, the virtual iOS image here, may be struggling a little bit with what we're trying to do. So let's go ahead and say VTP mode server. All right, so setting to VTP server mode for all VLANs. So now let's see if I can say VLAN 3333, or if it's going to want me to type in, and we've got to be the primary server. So VTP primary. and it wants the password ABC123. And so you can see that the checks from a security perspective are certainly more robust than when we had VTP version 1 or version 2. So now our focus is we're going to create some extended range VLANs. And so there we go. We've become the primary server for the VLAN VTP feature. So now let's get into global config and say VLAN 3333. And then we'll name it prod. And then he says, well, yeah, I need the VLAN 2222, right? These are clearly beyond the 1005 limit for the standard range VLANs. And we'll say name dev. And then we'll do a VLAN, I think it's probably 1111. And we'll just say name HR. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and say end, write mem. And it's interesting here. We'll see if we don't see the error message. I don't see the message that came up prior when it shifted us into client mode. And that was what that message had said, which it should not have done. So show VTP status. We should be a primary server, and there it's listed as a primary server. And then show VLAN brief. And you can see there are 1111-2222-3333. There are the extended range VLANs. And again, that's something that we could not have done with our regular range here. If I was to say this is a VTP server, so VLAN and do a question mark, you can see that it says 124094 ISL VLAN IDs 1 to 1005. If I tried to say 2222 and hit enter, we can't create VLAN 2222. Extended VLANs are not allowed in the current VTP mode. So we get a VLAN create fail. And it's because we're not in VTP mode, or I should say VTP version 3. We're running VTP version 2. Remember, versions 1 and 2 are limited to that 1 to 1005 range. Keeping in mind, again, just as a refresher, that we're not talking about 1 or the 1002 to 1005. And so basically, what we're really saying there is the range that we're dealing with is 2 to 1001, because 1002 to 1005 are reserved for the token ring FIDI legacy network stuff. All right. So we've done the change here. Let's come over to the client switch number 2. And let's take a look and say, show VLAN brief. And look at that. We've got all the VLANs. All right, so now we said switch 3. We're going to go ahead and set up as a transparent switch. But we're going to make it VTP version 3. So we'll get into global config. We'll say VTP domain is CCNP. We're going to say VTP version, sorry about that, VTP version 3. And you can see it's already in version 3. And we changed, and this may be the switch that we had logged on to earlier in my previous video, and I think I set this to version 3. Let's say VTP mode transparent. And so it's in transparent mode for all VLANs, and I'll say VTP password ABC123, and we'll make that hidden. All right, so we've got all that set up. So now if I say do show VLAN brief, we do not see any of the configured VLANs because it's in transparent mode. So let's type in and say write mem. So now let's come over here to switch 4. Now remember, switch 2 we set up as a client switch, and switch 4 is going to be a client as well. And in fact, these are all supposed to be clients. And I think what I'll do with at least one of them, and let's see, probably 2 would have been the one to do it to, but I guess these will all be clients. So we'll do the client config here, and we'll see what that looks like. So here we go. And you can see the VTP MD5 checksum, right? We've got it's not equal. There's a mismatch because the password doesn't match. Again, another protection in place so that we don't overwrite the database. So we'll go into global config, VTP domain, CCNP, VTP version 3. And so you can see we hadn't changed that here. VTP mode client. And now we are a client. And then we'll say VTP password ABC123 hidden. To hide that password, we'll say end. We'll save our configuration. And now, if I say show VLAN brief, there are all the VLANs that have been configured. Red, blue, yellow, HR, dev, and prod. So switch number 5 here. Again, if it's a client, we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to make 6 a server. And let's go ahead and come over here. And in fact, let's do 6 first, right? Because we won't do 5 right now. Let's do 6 to see if the VTP messages are passed from 1 to 2 and make it down here to 6. Remember, I'm sorry, from 1 to 3. Remember, 3 is transparent mode, but the domain name and the password match. And we saw previously that if the domain name matches, that it will forward those VTP advertisements for us. So let's see if that holds true here. So VTP domain, CCNP, VTP version 3, VTP mode, and we'll make this a server down here. Say VTP mode server. And again, that was the mode, sorry about that. And then VTP password is ABC123, and we definitely want to hide that on this server. So do show VTP password. Password is encrypted for us, right? Now, do show VLAN brief. This is the true test to see, did switch 3 kindly forward on the updates to switch 6? And you can clearly see that has happened. So now what I want to test, let's go ahead and say in, and let's say write mem. So I want to create another extended ranged VLAN. And I want to do it here from switch 6 because I just happen to be logged on. So let's say VTP primary. Enter the password ABC123. And now we wait. We wait for a check that goes out throughout the VTP domain to see, is somebody else currently the primary? And what I'm expecting to see is we have no conflicts. And so I'll say, yeah, we'll continue. And then let's quickly move up to switch 1. And on switch 1, and you can see switch 1 even sees the message. Let me say VTP primary, ABC123. Because what I'm trying to show you here is that what we should see is switch 1 should recognize that switch 6 is actually the VTP primary right now and should prevent us. And it says no conflicting devices found. Do you want to continue? Let me hit enter and let's see what happens here. So there's the message, and that's the MAC address for switch 1. And if we come down to switch 6, you can see that it actually made the change. And I'm wondering, and again, it could be that the transparent mode switch, that whatever the notification is or the check being done, and we'll find out here in a second when we bring switch 5 online as a client. And again, you'll notice that it didn't seem to think there was an issue. So let's go into privilege exec, global config, VTP domain, CCNP, VTP, it's already set to CCNP. All right, VTP version 3. It might already be version 3. It is not. Okay, so VTP version 3, and then we'll say VTP password ABC123 hidden, and that should be VTP mode client. So we'll make it a client for all VLANs, and then we'll say end and write mem and save our config. And so now the only switch in our environment, show VLAN brief, that is not a VTP server or a VTP client is switch 3. So now let's check with switch 1 and switch 6. Let's see if back over here where it shows that I am now VLAN 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so this is the primary. I'm in configuration mode. Let's see if now going this direction where we have a client and a client to get to the server, and maybe it's that the transparent mode isn't communicating the change. Let's see if that makes a difference. So from privilege exec, VTP primary, ABC123. And again, my expectation is we should see, if this is working correctly with this virtual iOS, we should see that there is a conflict, although I'm starting to wonder here, no conflicting VTP version 3 devices found. So I'm going to do a control C there. We'll come back up here We'll go ahead and name our VLAN. We'll say name is, who knows, INT for integration and testing. And I'll say end, we'll say write mem. And so now a advertisement should have gone out with this new information. And let's say show VLAN brief. Do we see VLAN 1, 2, 3, 4? And take a look at that. Very quickly, it updated here. We'll come down to switch number 4 and take a look. And what's interesting is I was teaching at Anne Arundel Community College, doing this in a lab environment with 2960s running 15.x. It was an early 15 release, and the same behavior in the switch being able to identify that another switch has the primary role also failed. And that was on physical Cisco switches. And so show VLAN brief. And so it looks like it might just be something like that. Now, this is interesting here that this switch does not see 1, 2, 3, 4 yet for INT. Now, switch 6 saw it. What about switch 5? Has it seen it yet? And let's take a look here. Show VLAN brief. Okay, so it has it. Does switch 2 have it? And you can see that they are communicating about whether or not one switch is primary or not. Good. Switch 5 has it. Let's check switch 4 again. One last check here on switch 4, and it should be updated at this point, and it's not yet. And so we're waiting for that update to make its way down here to switch 4. And if I say show VTP status, VTP status, we'll see that we have everything configured properly. It's just that we have not gotten the update yet. Show VLAN brief. Still not there. All right, so what if I say VTP primary here? And remember, this is a client, right? So I can't become the server because I'm a client. And again, I was just thinking of how to maybe do something to generate. And again, we're just simply not seeing the update down here yet on switch 4. Let's do this. Let me say write mem. And let me reload this switch. And it's not as fast as Packet Tracer, but it is pretty quick. And you can see the iOS V image. And we'll let this boot back up, and we'll find out whether or not it's going to pick up that advertisement. Because again, we have a server and a server, but then 2 and 5 are clients, and 4 is a client, right? But it should get the update behind the client. It should not get the update. And you can see down here, really nice Cisco Modeling Labs is showing me my CPU utilization. It goes above 70, it gets orange. Memory utilization, disk utilization. So really nice upgrade from Viral and the Viral interface. And so we'll allow this to wrap up its boot here. Oh, so again, let me do my summary right now while this is wrapping up its boot here. So remember, VTP version 3 supports extended ranged VLANs, supports private VLANs, supports encryption of the password so that it doesn't appear in plain text. And it's not just about, VTP version 3 is just not for VTP anymore. We can do multiple spanning tree region configuration synchronization using VTP version 3. You can do the primary server role, and any other server is simply just a secondary server. So now let's go ahead and say show VLAN brief, and let's see if the reload helped, and it didn't. And so we're going to chalk this up to the fact that for whatever reason, this iOS V image, and let's try one last thing here. Let's come on to VTP, or I'm sorry, switch 6, say VTP primary. Let me add another VLAN in, ABC123, and let's see if it picks up this other VLAN or not. So we'll wait a second or two here for the check. And if you're thinking of running VTP and you've got a use case for VTP, and there we go. So I'll get into global config and I'll say VLAN. Let's see, we'll say, I'm running out of tricky sequences here. How about 1432 or 1423? And then we'll name it and we'll just say that this is ops. We'll say end. We'll save our config. Let's come over to switch 5. And let's say show VLAN brief. And you can see how nice it is, though, that this is auto-magically happening. You can see the ops VLAN is there. Let's check switch 4 here that we just rebooted. And let's see if switch 4 picked up that new VLAN. And not only did it pick up the new VLAN, it finally picked up the INT VLAN, the 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. So again, just a little slow here over on switch 4, but we ultimately got it done. All right. Well, I wanted to give you guys a supplement to give you a look at VTP version 3, because if you're going to be using VTP, version 3 is what you should be using for all of the reasons I just covered. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully this adds a little value to your studies and gives you a better idea as to how VTP version 3 would be configured, would be troubleshot, and we could check things out. All right, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.